Today, we venture into Cortland, a city of contrasts, where the grim realities of gang violence and the illegal trade of prohibited substances are offset by the upstanding native residents. Despite its status as a small town, Cortland and the surrounding Panola County, with a population of 34,000, face their share of criminal activity and dangerous gangs. Regular shootouts and arrests of those involved in illegal trade are commonplace. This negative environment played a pivotal role in our story. On December 6, 2014, at 20:09, emergency services received a report of a vehicle fire on a rural road. The first firefighters to arrive at the scene encountered a blazing Kia Rio and immediately began extinguishing the flames. Inside the car was a hellish scene, with black smoke billowing upwards rapidly. As the rescuers doused the vehicle with foam, they accidentally noticed a dark figure slowly emerging from the nearby underbrush. The silhouette resembled either a young woman or a child. The victim was severely burned and looked like a living corpse. As the figure approached, the firefighters saw it was a young woman, dressed only in her underwear, covered in burns from head to toe. She approached them and asked for help. The unfortunate woman was completely burned. Her clothes had been incinerated, her skin was melting and slowly dripping downwards, and her entire body was bleeding. Her hair had turned into a charred lump of ash. Her face was black with soot. A rescuer wrapped her blistered body in a blanket and laid her on the ground. As they waited for the emergency medical services crew, the firefighters did not leave her side. The young woman, barely moving her lips, tried to utter individual words, which were indiscernible to those around. Considering her condition, she could not speak clearly, but several emergency responders still managed to hear the names Eric or Derek when she was asked who had attacked her. She was airlifted from a small rural town to a hospital in Memphis. However, after sustaining about 93% burns to her body, the young woman passed away 4 hours later. The victim was 19-year-old local resident Jessica Lane Chambers. Jessica grew up in Cortland, living with her mother across the street from her grandmother, while her father and stepmother lived further down the street. She was a petite and fragile young woman, but possessed a steely character. She was raised in a tumultuous family environment, much like many of her friends, relatives, and neighbors. Her father had pleaded guilty to manufacturing methamphetamine and had been arrested for driving under the influence in the early 2000s. In 2006, her 28-year-old neighbor was shot several times in his yard. Growing up in such a negative environment, Jessica did not turn out to be the quiet choir girl. She smoked, quarreled with her parents, had unstable relationships with boyfriends who had legal troubles, and as her family knew, sometimes acted out violently during disputes. Jessica's behavior became more pronounced at 17, following the death of her older brother Alan in a car accident in 2012. She moved out of her mother's home for several months after her mother disapproved of Jessica's new boyfriend. Her childhood was challenging. Her father spent some time in prison, but by 2014, he had been released and was working as a mechanic at the local sheriff's department. Jessica was not afraid to break the law. Occasionally, she sold illegal substances and was affiliated with local gangs. Nevertheless, the sweet and smiling Jessica was respected and liked by almost everyone she knew, making the shocking manner of her demise all the more mysterious. Rumors of a burning car and a deliberate fire-setting incident quickly spread throughout her small hometown. Jessica's father's position in the sheriff's department allowed him to be swiftly informed about the nearby car fire and the incident involving his daughter. Upon hearing the news, his wife ran down the street to tell Jessica's mother about the tragic event. They reached the hospital while Jessica was still alive. The tragic death of the young woman captured the nation's attention. Hundreds attended Jessica's funeral on December 13th, which was a memorial organized in honor of a joyful teenager, a former student, cheerleader, and a girl who dreamed of rising above her circumstances. A prolonged investigation into this high-profile case soon followed, stirring public interest. The FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals were called in to assist with the local investigation. The initial theory was that the fire resulted from a car accident. However, this was quickly ruled out as no signs of emergency braking or any other obstacles were found at the scene. An examination of the burned vehicle also showed no signs of impact or damage to the body. Thus, the theory was not supported. The primary theory then became arson, but at the time of the incident, the police had very few leads, and the lack of evidence prolonged the investigative process. Investigators questioned nearly everyone who might have been in contact with Jessica in the last days of her life. They even explored the possibility that her boyfriend, who was in prison at the time of the arson, might have ordered her demise. However, this theory was dismissed as he had been living in Iowa since their breakup. Ali Al-Sanai, the owner of a gas station, also came under suspicion. He was one of the last people to see Jessica alive. Ali gave his statement and was released. There was a theory that Jessica had brought trouble upon herself by associating with one of the local gangs. However, the gang members denied their involvement and expressed their condolences to the Chambers family. Many of those called in for questioning had good reasons to lie, even if they didn't know who ended her life. It seemed the investigation was at a standstill. There was neither a suspect nor a motive for such a brutal act. The public pressure on the investigation demanded justice, thereby slowing down the investigative process and repeatedly providing false leads about Jessica's life. Here are some of the theories that were most popular on social media. For instance, locals accused Brian Rudd, Jessica's ex-boyfriend from high school, who might have acted out of jealousy in a moment of intense emotion. Others suggested that Jessica sold someone faulty pills for several $100s, which could have angered a dealer. "This is the most mysterious case I have ever worked on," said District Attorney John Champion, who has been serving in the county for 22 years. He has been working on Jessica's case since December. Together with local detectives, the MBI, FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals Service. According to Champion, they have interviewed and in some cases re-interviewed over 130 people, including several individuals named Eric and Derek. Yet, authorities have not arrested any suspect so far. After some time, investigators managed to reconstruct the last week of Jessica's life, minute by minute, up to her tragic end. On December 5, 2014, after receiving a call on her cell phone, Jessica drove to the M&M Mini-Mart. Following a call from a friend, she purchased $14 worth of gasoline and left in her car at 5:15 p.m. Around 5:45 p.m., she called her mother to say she would return in a little while. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and she was dressed in camouflage pajama pants. She then made a few more stops, one at an unknown house and another in the nearest town, before arriving at the scene of her tragic end, possibly already accompanied in her car by the person who would end her life. Surveillance cameras also captured a man in a striped shirt refueling a gas can before heading in the same direction as Jessica. However, there were no confirming data about the man's further movements. Cell phone records indicated that she spent about 15 minutes near a traffic light on Highway No. 6, heading towards Batesville. The subsequent 62 minutes, between 6:30 p.m. and 7:32 p.m., also known as the mystery hour, took time to unravel. At 7:30 p.m., Jessica's phone showed that she reached the location on Heron Road, where her burning car was later found. So, where did Jessica Chambers go and what led to her brutal fate? The investigation moved very slowly. Only in December 2015, in a separate case involving charges of illegal possession of weapons, controlled substances, and counterfeits, 17 suspected gang members were arrested. District Attorney John Champion did not expect any of the gang members to be directly linked to the case of the burning incident. It turned out that during plea negotiations, all gang members were offered the opportunity to assist the investigation. Thus, the gang members pointed to a certain Quinton Tellis. Then, investigators finally learned who Jessica was with an hour before the fire. But in February 2016, authorities announced a pause in the case to conduct a more detailed investigation and establish a motive. The lack of official suspects only deepened the spread of baseless rumors, which circulated on the internet and then throughout the town. This situation attracted online detectives. A Facebook page called Justice for Jessica was created, offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and a widespread search for her assailant. Rumors also circulated online that Jessica, who had previously dated African-American men, had been targeted by white supremacists for her involvement in interracial relationships. Conversely, online conspiracy theorists suggested that the culprits were African American because Jessica was in a gang and was perpetrated in retaliation for trying to leave it. However, none of these theories received official confirmation. The investigation became particularly interested in the figure of Quinton Tellis. After revisiting social media and Jessica's cell phone, they identified whom the young cheerleader had been communicating with in the last hours of her life. During the first interrogation, 29-year-old Quinton Tellis recounted that the meeting, which had been arranged by text message, was the only time they met, and he did not know her well, merely asking for a ride home. However, with more comprehensive information than presenting all the messages, Tellis was arrested on charges of ending Jessica Chambers' life through arson. Text messages reveal that Tellis repeatedly sent Jessica requests of a very intimate nature. On the day of the tragedy, Jessica texted Quinton at 9:02 a.m. to tell him she had just woken up, and he replied a few minutes later that he had as well. At 10:09 a.m., Tellis texted Chambers, "I'm ready," shortly after she stopped at the M&M gas station. She was captured on surveillance footage, leaving the M&M a few minutes later, presumably to pick up Tellis. Afterwards, they picked up one of Jessica's friends. Around 10:49 a.m., Jessica dropped Quinton off. Later, around 2:03 p.m., Tellis began messaging Jessica again, this time explicitly asking for some love. This was the fourth message in 4 days in which he requested intimacy via text. Other deleted texts were recovered, including messages like "I'm excited" and "Come lie with me," which Jessica left unanswered. The passenger seat in Jessica Chambers' burned car was pushed back, a position typical for intimate activities in a car. Prosecutors argued that this was evidence that the two were engaged in, or at least attempting, intimacy that tragic evening. On February 24th, Tellis was charged with ending Jessica's life and arson. It took the investigation considerable time to build the case. The first trial in the Jessica Chambers case began in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi, about 50 miles south of Memphis. The trial was highly publicized with strict security measures in place. Jurors were sequestered and spectators were screened with metal detectors before entering the courtroom. Prosecutor John Champion warned the jurors that they would see disturbing images of the burned Jessica Chambers and hear testimony from about 35 witnesses. Investigators stated that Jessica met Quinton Tellis around Thanksgiving in November 2014. He was 7 years her senior and had attended the same high school before she enrolled there. In October of that same year, he had been released from prison, where he had served time for burglary. FBI agent Dustin Blount testified during the first trial. He met Jessica through a friend at a gas station in Cortland, Mississippi. They spent a lot of time driving around together on multiple occasions. He went as far as to say that they had been intimate. He stated that they had been in the passenger seat, detailing further that the passenger seat was reclined back and he was sitting in the passenger seat with Jessica Chambers sitting on him. In court, John Champion said, "There was a series of text messages between them, even on the day of her demise, in which he requested intimacy. The front seat in the burned car was adjusted downward as Tellis had described during their previous encounter. Champion claimed that Tellis attempted to end her life by strangulation, then, thinking she was deceased, doused her with gasoline and set her alight." A friend of Jessica, who testified, indicated that the three of them had ridden in Jessica's car the day before the incident. Later, Tellis confessed to investigators that he saw Jessica that night, and they went to a fast food restaurant together. Various friends he claimed to have been with when the fire started could not confirm his alibi. He then appeared on a store surveillance camera several miles away, where he was purchasing a phone card for a friend who lived in Louisiana. Tellis did not testify in his own defense at the trial. A central element of the defense was the fact that several emergency responders at the scene of the tragedy reported hearing Jessica utter the name Eric or Derek. Ultimately, 2 jurors reacted to the fact that Quinton Tellis' name sounded nothing like Eric or Derek. Panola County District Attorney John Champion pointed to text messages in which Tellis repeatedly requested intimacy from Chambers. You will see text messages between them where Quinton is consistently asking Jessica for intimacy, and she is consistently denying him.
Champion testified at the first trial. It was proven that there was a series of text messages, even on the day of her death, where he was requesting intimacy from her. Also, FBI agent Dustin Blount shared that during questioning, Tellis admitted to deleting Jessica's contact information and all their text messages from his phone soon after her demise. When asked why, Quinton calmly responded, "I wasn't scared, but once we found out who it was, who had passed there, I just deleted my contact with her, because I didn't want to have a deceased person in my phone, a number in my phone that just wouldn't be used anymore." At the first trial, FBI agent Dustin Blount demonstrated that Tellis and Chambers met through a friend at a gas station in their small hometown of Cortland. They drove around together a lot, many times, said Agent Blount, who recalled interrogating Tellis. He went so far as to say that they had been intimate at some point. Agent Blount, who spoke with Tellis at his home 11 days after Jessica's passing, asked Tellis to describe the intimate encounter and pinpoint where it occurred. Tellis indicated a driveway south of the house he shared with his mother. Back in December 2014, he lived with his mother in a trailer up the road from the convenience store where Jessica Chambers was last seen before the fire. His DNA was found on the woman's keys, and his cell phone records placed him at that location on the night in question. However, Quinton Tellis continued to maintain his innocence. Defense attorney Darla Palmer, in her opening statement, urged the jurors to disregard the cell phone location evidence, which she argued could not prove that Tellis and Chambers were at the same place. Quinton has always maintained his innocence, telling police in the interrogation room, even after being threatened with capital punishment if it went to trial, "I've told the truth. I did not end Jessica's life. I don't have it in my heart to end anyone's life."
His family claims that the police are merely looking for someone to blame in a case that has become a highly charged racial issue since Tellis, who is African American, was arrested for the death of the attractive white cheerleader. Investigators looked for connections to other recent fires in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Jessica was a white woman who dated African American men, and she wasn't the first white woman attacked over interracial relationships, but they say they found no links. "I can't tell you how many different theories we've considered," said Champion. "Typically, law enforcement can quickly identify suspects in a homicide through street informants, interviewing witnesses, but no matter how much we've cooperated with people, listening to testimonies, taking DNA swabs, conducting polygraph tests, we haven't come any closer to an arrest." The first trial in 2017 ended in a mistrial due to confusion related to the jury instructions. They stated that a guilty verdict must be unanimous, but did not explicitly say the same for a not guilty verdict. Officials noted that the jurors apparently decided that since they could not unanimously agree on Tellis's guilt, this implied his innocence. By the time of the retrial in 2018, Quinton Tellis was under investigation in Louisiana for the end of life of student Ming Chen Xiao, as well as for the illegal use of a stolen bank card. In May 2019, he was charged with second-degree murder in connection with Xiao's demise. The second trial was notably challenging. Jurors were shown a photo of Jessica Chambers, which firefighter Cole had taken upon arriving at the scene. Cole shared that the image of Chambers, her lips blackened with soot, haunted her, and she told jurors, "I see this photo I took every morning and every night." A veteran firefighter stated that he had never seen a victim with such severe burns when he found the young woman lying on the ground, barely able to speak, after she had been deliberately set on fire. She was sitting on a blanket. Her hair was singed, soot around her nose and mouth, blisters all over her body. Cole, the Panola County Director of Emergency Operations, told the jurors, "I sat and held her hand. That's all I could do," said firefighter Cole Haley, holding back tears. "I told her, 'Sweetheart, it's going to be okay.' And she replied, 'And I'm going to die.' At that moment, I lay down beside her," Haley recounted. "Her skin was hanging from her lips and her nose," testified paramedic Bradley Dixon. "Her eyelashes and eyebrows were gone. The hair on her head was a warm, matted clump." Testimonies at the second hearing also included a woman named Sherry Flowers, who had not appeared at the first trial of Tellis, but told investigators during questioning that she had picked up a hitchhiker on the night Jessica Chambers was tragically ended. Sherry Flowers did not recognize Tellis in court and agreed with the prosecutor that she did not know whom she had picked up. However, she told the court that a man flagged her down and she stopped because she thought it was her cousin. She agreed to give a ride to the man, whom she described as an African-American male, about 20 years old and of slim to medium build. Tellis, who was 5 feet 9 inches tall, was 26 at the time. Initially, Flowers did not reach out to investigators, and when asked why in court, she said, "I couldn't remember and thought it wasn't relevant to the case." Nevertheless, the prosecutors attempted to link this ride to the demise of Jessica Chambers, suggesting it provided Quinton Tellis with the opportunity to leave Jessica's car in order to return and set it on fire.
However, the defense contested the timing, and Flowers admitted that she was unsure of the exact time of the ride, only stating, "I know I picked someone up." The investigator also presented that Jessica Chambers' keys were found in a ditch 2 days after her passing, near the spot where the hitchhiker was picked up. The defense objected to the keys being admitted into evidence, arguing it was impossible to prove where the keys had been at the time. During the retrial, jurors were required to visit the sites involved in the crime and hear additional testimony. The second trial was highly emotional. Witnesses broke down on the stand, and spectators wept as photos of the young woman Jessica Chambers' burned abdomen and face were shown. One of the first responders, cheerfully testifying, embraced the girl's father as he stepped down from the stand. In 2018, the second jury also failed to reach a verdict in the Tellis trial, marking the second jury in 2 years to be deadlocked over whether Quinton Tellis was responsible for setting Jessica and her car on fire. Despite the suspect having been tried twice, no conviction was secured, and the case remains officially unsolved. Nevertheless, online sleuths continue to scour social media for any clue that investigators might have missed, developing their own often outlandish theories about who truly ended Jessica Chambers' life. The demise of Jessica Chambers initially drew significant media attention. Over time, as media interest waned, the story captured the attention of internet detectives worldwide. To this day, one of the most discussed aspects of the Jessica Chambers case is what transpired between her leaving home and her tragic end. According to reports, Jessica left her house at 5 p.m. on the night of the crime, telling her mother she was going to a nearby gas station. Surveillance footage from the gas station shows Chambers there twice. The footage captures Jessica fueling up, then heading toward the store and waving to someone off camera before approaching them. Observers continue to speculate about whom young Jessica was waving at that day. Amateur detectives have tried to crack the case on their own, developing their own theories and sometimes following information that was blatantly false, and at times even harassing the family and friends of Jessica Chambers. These individuals, ranging from conservative bloggers to gluten-free bakers from Montreal, boating enthusiasts from Florida and grocery coupon collectors from North Carolina, claim to seek justice for Jessica above all else. Instead, they have terrorized her once peaceful hometown with their relentless demands for answers to their dubious theories. In the process, they spread rumors that seep into real life, stirring racial tensions, digging up old grudges, and reigniting feuds. For these amateur detectives, Jessica's death is not a mother's tragedy, it's a pastime. Media critics use the term missing white woman syndrome to describe the national obsession with victims who are young, blonde, and white, and Jessica fit all these criteria. A former cheerleader with flaxen hair, weighing just 90 pounds. But those obsessed with Jessica's death are particularly fixated on her tiny hometown. Outsiders can easily track down social media accounts and even phone numbers of Jessica's family members, friends, ex-boyfriends, and sworn enemies, all of whom have reported being contacted by strangers wanting to interrogate them about whether they took the life of the teenager. The police say they still don't know who ended her life and why, leaving the mystery in the hands of online amateur sleuths who may do more harm than good. When does a personal tragedy become a public spectacle? The Justice for Jessica memorial page on Facebook, managed by Jessica's older stepsister, remains popular. It has united many compassionate people from around the world who once heard about the young woman burned alive People send letters of sympathy, supportive words for the family and friends, and donate books and gifts in Jessica's name. Hanging in Jessica's room is a memorial quilt made of bright pink patches with zebra prints, along with her photo and the dates of her birth and death. The words "secret group" were stitched into the top left square. No one knows what this phrase means, as the quilt, like other gifts, came from around the world. Tragically, Jessica's death did not change the town of Cortland. Everyone knows each other here, and both authorities and locals believe the attack was personal. 29-year-old Quinton Tellis, serving time for a different crime, is not a free man, yet justice for Jessica still has not been achieved. Regrettably, Jessica's mother, Lisa, passed away on October 29, 2021, at the age of 52, without seeing justice served for her daughter. It remains uncertain whether there will be a third trial for the case of the young woman burned alive. The case of Samantha Fraser is a clear example of the fact that a monster cannot be re-educated even by a qualified, experienced psychologist, and at the first manifestations of cruelty one should run away. Such people do not change, do not deserve a second chance. They are capable of the most terrible deeds and believe in their impunity. The tragedy played out on a quiet Australian island, Phillip, located near Melbourne, in the summer of 2018. But let's get to the story in order. Adrian Basham is a native of Australia. He was born in 1973. The boy was brought up in the family of a policeman, and although in the field of view of law enforcement agencies in his early years he did not fall, now many are sure that his cruelty and attacks of uncontrolled aggression are connected with his childhood and family. Looking ahead, Adrian's father, James Basham, upon learning of the brutal murder committed by his son, not only did not condemn him, but based on his police experience, gave him instructions on how to behave to try to avoid punishment. Samantha Fraser was born in the suburbs of Melbourne in the summer of 1980 in a friendly and loving family, Jeanine and Travis Fraser, parents in every way to support their only daughter, trying to give her a good education and reveal her talents. Samantha studied well at school and also actively engaged in sports and repeatedly received awards for her high achievements. Then the girl entered a prestigious university at the Faculty of Psychology, which she graduated with a red diploma. During her studies, she continued to engage in sports, in particular acrobatics, gymnastics, and dancing, which allowed her to lead the student cheerleading team. After receiving a higher education, Samantha got a job as a psychotherapist in a large medical institution, where she quickly gained the respect and trust of colleagues and patients. This profession was her calling. Samantha truly loved what she was doing. Samantha and Adrian first met in late 2005. At first, they had a friendly relationship, which soon turned into a romance. Many of those who were personally acquainted with this couple did not understand what could connect these young people, so different in everything they were. Samantha was kind, open, and sociable. She could always find a peaceful way out of any difficult situation. Adrian, on the contrary, was quite harsh and rude in communication, characterized by a fiery and confrontational nature. But despite this, a year and a half after acquaintance, the couple officially legalized their relationship. The newlyweds bought housing in the suburbs of Melbourne, not far from the house of Samantha's parents. Soon, the man got a job in a large company engaged in the development of mineral deposits. His work was associated with constant business trips and travel, because of which he was not often at home. It is safe to say that this is the reason why his and Samantha's marriage lasted so long. Adrian turned out to be a real domestic tyrant who tried to control his wife in everything. He not only demanded unquestioning obedience, but also had some oddities that could indicate that he had a mental disorder. For example, he maniacally insisted that the house was always in perfect order, and it concerned not only cleanliness, but also the location of things. We are talking about such small things as the location of books on the shelf or toiletries in the bathroom. Any change could instantly trigger his anger and aggression. Samantha, being a psychologist, knew how to smooth out conflicts and hoped that in time her husband would change, become more calm and restrained. In addition, the marriage gave birth to 3 common children, daughters Jemima and April, as well as a son Rex. But even the appearance of heirs did not soften the character of Adrian. In 2014, another family scandal ended in hand-to-hand abuse. Then Samantha kept silent, did not report to the police, and did not tell anyone about what happened. The man doubted the decision, but Brenda convinced her spouse. While he was building a career as an advertising manager, she managed to get a degree and get a job in banking. Mrs. Andrew fell in love with the tall buildings of the city, nightclubs, and busy life. Texas changed the young woman. She got rid of her excessive modesty. She began to take care of herself, wear fashionable clothes, makeup, made a large circle of friends. Her husband was not very pleased with his wife's transformation. He thought that a believing woman should be more restrained. Besides, Rob was homesick. Therefore, when he was offered to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he gladly agreed. However, Brenda did not support her spouse. They even quarreled on this ground. Then still came to a compromise. The couple agreed that Robert will settle in a new place and find a suitable house. And if everything works out well, the wife will join him. A few months they lived separately from each other. Subsequently, the family was reunited. In the early 1990s, the Andrew couple settled in a luxurious house in the prestigious neighborhood of Landsbrook, and 9 months later they had a daughter, Tricity. Brenda even quit her job to become a housewife and engage in child rearing. 4 years later came son Parker. It seemed that there came a family idyll. For this, they had everything: love, children, home, and financial prosperity. What happened in Mrs. Andrews' garage? On November 20th, 2001, a few days before Thanksgiving, Rob planned to stop by Brenda's house. He had made arrangements with her in advance to take the children with him for the holidays. At the time, the couple was divorced. In the evening, his ex-wife met him on the doorstep of the house. She asked the man to go to the garage and help with the faulty equipment. When he bent down, he heard footsteps behind him. Robert turned toward the noise. A gunshot rang out and the wounded man fell to the concrete floor. Around 6 p.m., the emergency services received a call. The caller turned out to be Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance immediately rushed to the scene. When the paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. In the garage, in a pool of blood, lay a man whose cause of death was a gunshot wound. His wife was luckier, shot in the arm. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and the woman herself looked remarkably detached. The paramedic put her condition down to shock. "I tried to give Rob first aid, but I think he's dead," she reported. The victim's hand was bandaged, and she was later taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left the scene, police began their examination. The first thing they found was a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall. A little while later, a shotgun shell casing was found, so multiple weapons were used in the attack. The second thing the officers noticed was the victim's wallet. He still had it on him, so the shooting wasn't connected to a robbery. To understand what happened, it was necessary to interview Mr. Andrews' ex-wife. At the clinic, Brenda explained the reason for their meeting. She also explained that while they were busy, 2 masked armed men entered the garage. The thugs shouted something in their direction, but what exactly she couldn't hear. One of them then shot Rob twice, and the other wounded her as she was about to flee. After that, the attackers hurriedly fled. Who the attackers were and what they had come for was not known to her. However, the victim added that Robert could hardly have enemies, as he was a decent and kind person, always helping other people. The woman admitted that she was frightened by what happened, especially the fact that there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, many things in her words were contradictory. It was clear to the police that Brenda was not telling the truth, especially the fact that the children were not packed for the trip. Interviews with neighbors yielded no positive results. Samantha had severe bruising under her eye and on her temple, and her entire body was covered with abrasions and hematomas received during her lifetime. In addition, as the forensic medical examination later determined, The deceased had suffered a severe head injury, so she was either unconscious or already dead when she was hanged. Under the fingernails on her hands, forensic experts found blood and epithelial particles, which means that the victim desperately resisted and scratched her tormentor. There were also numerous washed-up traces of blood and small splatters on the floor, walls, and on the body of the car in the garage. Later, blood was also found in several places on the rope from which the deceased was hanging. In the evening of the same day, Adrian Basham arrived at his father James's home on his motorcycle. He looked worried, and his face had several fresh scratches on it. When questioned by his father, he was evasive, and regarding the abrasions, he explained that he had scratched himself with tree branches while riding his motorcycle without a helmet. He then took a large pack of wet wipes and started wiping his vehicle, arguing that he wanted to remove the mats that had stuck to it during the ride. As a former police officer, his father immediately suspected something wrong, and his professional instincts did not fail him. When detectives showed up on his doorstep the next day with questions about his son, claiming he was the prime suspect in his ex-wife's murder case, James realized what was going on. At first, Basham Sr. stated that he had not seen his son, and after buying some time, instructed the heir on how and what he should say, how to behave in order to be able, if not to get out, at least to mitigate his punishment. Adrian followed his father's advice, listened silently to the charges read to him, and obediently went to the station, with the support of the lawyers already hired by his father. Adrian at first categorically refused to cooperate with the investigation. He did not deny his guilt, but simply kept silent, ignoring all questions. Nevertheless, the collected evidence was enough. Fresh scratches on the man's face did not escape the attention of the investigators. As suspected, he had been scratched by Samantha in an attempt to defend himself, and blood and epithelial particles were found under her fingernails. The suspect's sweat marks were also found on the rope from which his ex-wife's body was hanging. After examining the motorcycle belonging to Adrian, washed-up traces of the deceased's blood were also found on it, and a bloody woman's blouse was found in a garbage can outside his father's house. Apparently, he tried to get rid of that evidence, but didn't have time. Surveillance footage that Samantha installed outside her home shortly before the tragedy shows a man leaving the crime scene in a hurry on the day of the murder. Although his face was concealed by a hood pulled over his baseball cap, there was no doubt that it was Adrian. The chronology of the last day of the victim's life was reconstructed bit by bit, and the resulting picture was striking in its brutality. So while no one was at home, Basham managed to break the lock of the garage door and get inside, where he waited for several hours for the return of his ex-wife. An unsuspecting Samantha drove into her garage, and Adrian attacked her before she could get out of the car. Fraser fought back desperately, as evidenced by the scratches on the perpetrator's face, but the forces were unequal. He beat the victim until she lost consciousness, and then, to cover his tracks, removed her blood-stained blouse, replacing it with a black t-shirt found in the house, and doused her head with water to wash the blood from her blonde hair. Adrian then put a rope around his ex-wife's neck and hung her from the garage door. To be sure, he put a stepladder on the floor next to the body, but the length of the rope was not calculated. Adrian cleaned up the bloodstains, but he missed the small spatters that were literally everywhere. In 2014, another family scandal ended in hand-to-hand abuse. Then Samantha kept silent, did not report to the police, and did not tell anyone about what happened.
This is mind-boggling. A young woman and loving mother of 3 was found dead in the garage of her own home. The killer tried to make it look like a voluntary death, but numerous clues said otherwise. In addition, the condition of Samantha's body indicated that she had accepted martyrdom. The saddest part was that the victim had lived with this man for many years, endured moral and physical abuse, raised his children, and hoped that he would change over time. When Adrian realized that there was no point in denying or keeping silent because all the evidence pointed to him, he changed tactics. Basham stated that he was indeed at his ex-wife's house that day, but just wanted to talk to her and convince her to withdraw her domestic violence lawsuit. Allegedly, the conversation didn't go well, and fists came into play, but afterward the man, he said, left, and Fraser was alive and conscious at the time. The defendant's lawyers insisted that their client was guilty only of battery, and after that, in their opinion, Samantha herself took her own life. But, according to relatives, Samantha would never do that and did not leave her children. Besides, she was soon going to remarry and made big plans for life. The murder trial did not take place until the end of 2022. The sessions were attended by the older children of the former spouses, who condemned their father and asked for a fair punishment for him. The youngest son was not present in the courtroom. The child decided not to traumatize unnecessarily. In addition, the boy was panic-stricken, afraid of his father. The defense attempted to prove that the defendant acted spontaneously, being in a state of affect. But this version failed because Adrian waited several hours for his victim, prepared things and objects for the crime, and tried to get rid of evidence. The final verdict on this case, the court announced only in February 2023. Adrian was found guilty of brutal premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison, without parole for at least the next 30 years. Janine and Travis Fraser became guardians of his and Samantha's children. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead. I'll see you again.
When the paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. In the garage, in a pool of blood, lay a man whose cause of death was a gunshot wound. His wife was luckier, shot in the arm. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and the woman herself looked remarkably detached. The paramedic put her condition down to shock. "I tried to give Rob first aid, but I think he's dead," she reported. The victim's hand was bandaged, and she was later taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left the scene, police began their examination. The first thing they found was a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall. A little while later, a shotgun shell casing was found, so multiple weapons were used in the attack. The second thing the officers noticed was the victim's wallet. He still had it on him, so the shooting wasn't connected to a robbery. To understand what happened, it was necessary to interview Mr. Andrew's ex-wife. At the clinic, Brenda explained the reason for their meeting. She also explained that while they were busy, 2 masked armed men entered the garage. The thugs shouted something in their direction, but what exactly she couldn't hear. One of them then shot Rob twice, and the other wounded her as she was about to flee. After that, the attackers hurriedly fled. Who the attackers were and what they had come for was not known to her. However, the victim added that Robert could hardly have enemies, as he was a decent and kind person, always helping other people. The woman admitted that she was frightened by what happened, especially the fact that there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, many things in her words were contradictory. It was clear to the police that Brenda was not telling the truth, especially the fact that the children were not packed for the trip. Interviews with neighbors yielded no positive results. However, they were nowhere to be seen. After a while, it became clear that James and Brenda had fled the country. Police speculated that they were in Mexico. To catch the criminals, it was decided to block their accounts. Without their livelihood, they would sooner or later make themselves known, and so they did. 3 months later, Pavitt contacted his daughter. He asked her to send the money. Only one thing the man didn't take into account. The girl was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had no doubts about her father's involvement in the crime. He was clearly hiding something from her. Even that time when he asked her boyfriend to call Mr. Andrew, pretending to be a doctor at the local hospital and report his wife's illness. Thanks to James's call, the investigation became aware that the perpetrators were hiding in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were apprehended at the border and handed over to the U.S. authorities. The two were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. Meanwhile, the Andrew couple's children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. After their arrest, none of the defendants were willing to cooperate with the investigation. They did not plead guilty,
talking in the presence of lawyers, trials. The first to stand before the court was James. The prosecution carefully built a case. It was reported that in the past Pavat was an army sniper and knew how to handle firearms. His scandalous affair and attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from stripping Brenda of her beneficiary status were also voiced. His daughter's testimony and the physical evidence that was found were taken into account. The jury found James Pavat guilty and sentenced him to death. Next to go on trial was Brenda Andrew. While James's trial was methodical, building up into a clear portrait of motives, means, and execution, Brenda's trial was full of sordid details, revelations, and intrigue. The prosecution brought Brenda's personality and her string of infidelities to the forefront. Her former lovers were invited to the hearing. They characterized the woman as a person of far from faith and integrity. When the prosecutor asked Brenda why she killed her husband, she replied, "God knows that in my heart I am pure and innocent. If you are people of faith, set me free." The prosecutor disagreed. He presented her as a lecherous woman who did not love her husband, cheated on him, and then killed him for selfish purposes. To prove his point, he showed the contents of a suitcase she had taken with her to Mexico. It contained lacy lingerie as well as the book 203 Ways to Drive a Man Crazy in Bed. Would a grieving widow run away from her husband's funeral? The prosecutor asked the defendant. In turn, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim of what happened. The defense attorney recalled that she was also injured in the attack. However, forensic experts said that the woman shot herself in the arm, to which the defense said that it possessed a letter with Pavat's sole confession to the crimes committed. That would seem to be a valid argument. However, the handwriting expertise established that the document was forged by Brenda Andrew herself. However, the most shocking revelation was another. Pavat's attorney stated that in the event of his ward's death, Brenda became the beneficiary of his insurance policy. In time, apparently, the same fate awaited him as Rob. Or maybe Brenda thought that she would be able to prove her innocence, and the punishment for the crime would fall on the shoulders of her lover. After the latter's death sentence, she'd be entitled to the insurance money too. The jury deliberated for about 6 hours. In the end, Brenda Andrew was found guilty of the crime charged and sentenced to death.
Bottom line, both convicts are on death row awaiting execution. Brenda repeatedly appeals the judgment, but is unsuccessful. Pavat's execution is scheduled for July 2024. It may be rescheduled again, as it has been done 4 times before. Brenda's execution date has not yet been set. She is the only woman sentenced to capital punishment in Oklahoma. The criminal intent of Brenda and James is horrific in and of itself. However, the fact that these men considered themselves God-fearing, teaching morality to children, further clouds the situation. People who preach things that do not guide their personal lives are unscrupulous and ruthless. You can expect anything from them because they are unfamiliar with moral principles. Jeremy Ogden, a detective with the Hobart, Indiana Police Department, leaned over his desk, staring at a manuscript that had kept him busy for years. The diary bore witness to a tragic story involving 53-year-old Christopher Reagan. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan. In this city, he lived his early years, and there he received his education. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to join the ranks of those who were willing to defend their country. Christopher found his true calling and devoted himself to the service of his country. With honor and devotion, he stood guard over the peace of the citizens. This choice forever determined his fate. Christopher was sent to a military base located near the cozy town of Marquette. Here, on the military base, not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the cozy town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they saw each other and sympathy arose at first sight. Young people often met on the streets of the city and embarrassed to say hello, and over time began to walk together. Communication became more and more frequent and closer, and eventually grew into friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because the service in the Army did not leave Christopher the opportunity to build a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state, but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer, and in December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always observed the line of propriety. Terry happily agreed. After a short time, the lovers realized that they had many common interests: a love of nature, a preference for a measured lifestyle, a thirst for tranquility. That's why Iron River became the perfect place for both of them. The couple made the decision to live together. Christopher moved in with Terry, found a job at a factory producing parts for military ships, and soon he had his own subordinates. Life was shaping up in the best possible way. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As young people did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Iron River seemed too small, and Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here he found not only a job, but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In a new city, Chris was about to start his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk, as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was worried. She tried calling him for several days. Concerned, she contacted mutual friends, but they knew nothing.
10 days later, a worried Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was accepted, but the police were quick to comfort Terry, assuring her that people sometimes disappear for a while and then return, sometimes even ending up in other places. At the police station, Terry also revealed that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina. For the police, this was reason not to be too concerned, suggesting that he may have made it to his new residence and decided to start a new life, severing all ties to the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, astonishingly, no information could be obtained. Christopher had not shown up for work in 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search forces headed into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to reinforce the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him. Perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to lean toward the idea that all of this might be connected to the crime. After inspecting Regan's home, it was decided to start searching for him on a larger scale. The police looked carefully through the neighborhood and finally found Regan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It was unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally. They had to break one of the doors to get inside the car. There was nothing suspicious in the interior. On the seat were ordinary clothes, such as those often found among locals: hat, coat, gloves. However, one of the policemen carefully noticed on the front passenger seat a small piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. It was decided to follow the route indicated in the note. There was no specific address on the paper, but the route was described in detail. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that, judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper. This route took them to a neighboring town. Stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes, the investigators knocked on the door. They needed to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife, Kelly, soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Regan, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well, and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages. She received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. Investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car.
Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation was a conversation with Christopher's co-workers. The detectives went to the factory where they interviewed workers and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors had been circulating for months. This statement sparked interest, and investigators decided to re-interview the Cochran couple and clarify what was really going on in their relationship. In the end, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher did have an affair, but she was unable to disclose it the previous time because of her husband's presence. She and Jason, she said, have an open relationship, and Jason is generally okay with his wife's affairs on the side. However, the topic was sensitive and may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers, for their part, refuted Kelly's words. They stated that Jason was far from approving of the affair, and there was no loose relationship in the Cochran family, as Kelly claimed. Following Kelly into the police office was Jason himself. A conversation with him unequivocally revealed that he was adamantly opposed to his spouse's infidelity. This position made him a suspect. Nevertheless, the lack of conclusive evidence made it impossible to conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. The officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious mystery remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator who immediately began actively working on it. The first order of business, Hobart Police Department Detective Jeremy Ogden began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and immediately after graduation, they began living together. The two were completely different in personality. Kelly was open, socially adept, and loved to talk. Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity. He never started a conversation first, only answering questions asked of him. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married. After the wedding, the couple started their own company, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it brought them a decent income. Most of the pool maintenance work was taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health. The man began to have back problems, and every day he felt heavier and heavier. One day he realized that he was unable to continue the business. That's when Kelly took over all the work of running the business. It was a difficult period, but she trusted that her husband would soon recover and return to his duties. While his condition was getting worse day by day and the medical drugs were not bringing the desired relief, Kelly looked for all ways to help her husband recover. One day, she learned about a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. There was a chance, although its use in medical practice had only recently begun. It wasn't available everywhere, especially since it was banned in the state where they lived. For Kelly and Jason, the only way to get the drug was to move. They chose Michigan and moved to Iron River Township in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult with a doctor and get a prescription for a miracle plant. Finally, his agony was going to be over. So, in early 2014, the plant, which specializes in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, brought a new employee, 34-year-old Kelly Cochran, who had moved with her husband Jason to the area. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and the couple took a job at the same plant where Christopher Regan worked.
Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This companionship was of particular importance to Christopher, who had recently been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. After reviewing all the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case to a judge in Michigan to obtain a search warrant for the Cochrans' home. After successfully obtaining a ruling, the very next day, March 6th, the prosecutor sent a team of investigators to the couple's residence. The search of the Cochran house was conducted with special care, trying to find any traces indicating the possible involvement of Kelly and Jason in the disappearance of Christopher. However, all efforts were in vain. The only important find was a book, authored by Jason. He used a pseudonym from the world of video games. The title of the work caused a smile, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described murder scenes of everyone who had ever wronged him. The detectives read the book from cover to cover and noticed one of the characters that matched Christopher's characteristics exactly. Suspicions about Jason grew stronger. Perhaps he wasn't making up the crimes, but was inspired by real events he had committed. Given the heightened suspicions, it was decided 3 weeks later to conduct another search of the Cochran house. The investigation hoped to uncover evidence that might have been missed in the previous search. When police officers drove up to the Cochrans' home, they found that no cars were in sight and the yard and driveway were empty. Attempts to knock on the door were fruitless. No one opened the door. It turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried because they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples instead. Ready to help, the Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home. The couple, for their part, did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder. Nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher Regan. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived on the scene where Kelly, in a state of utter panic, obstructed doctors. However, it soon became clear that Jason would no longer require assistance. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning with fire as if from extreme overheating. The doctors were forced to confirm his death. The body was sent for forensic examination. Kelly was handed over to a police patrol who took her to relatives who lived nearby, down the same street. Determined to find out the circumstances of what happened, investigators searched the Cochrans' new home. During the search, one of the officers discovered a syringe needle at the foot of the marital bed. After evaluating the condition of Jason's body, the investigator concluded that his death was caused by abuse of illegal substances. However, the forensic report came as a surprise to the detectives. Although Jason was found to have an excessive amount of illegal substances in his system, the forensic results pointed to something more shocking. Jason's death was caused by strangulation, as confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. Thus, Jason, the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Christopher Regan, was himself a victim of the crime. This discovery led to new questions and a re-examination of the evidence. Forensic experts immediately turned their attention to Kelly Cochran, who seemed to be the link between the two crimes. Now she was to become the prime suspect not only in Christopher's disappearance, but also in her husband's murder. This investigation became an even more complex puzzle. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the course of the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden encountered Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who, upon learning of the horrific incident from Kelly herself, immediately rushed to the police. Walter emphasized that illegal drugs could not be the cause of Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and he would certainly tell him about any changes in his life. Moreover, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs with the sole purpose of getting rid of the back pain that had accompanied him for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been in a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his worries with him, saying that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana because of suspicions of the Iron River Police in their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had happened had greatly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and tried to take his own life, which required serious treatment. Walter also noted a distinct change in his friend's behavior. Kelly began to take more and more control over his life. It seemed that Jason was constantly on edge. Whereas before the boys could spend hours playing video games together, Jason now began to avoid parties as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became an important link in the investigation and allowed investigators to understand what was going on in the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Regan. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. Walter accepted a difficult role. He was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea. And this came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. However, despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her. But she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, It suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators. It was like a mockery of justice. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran.
Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 busy days full of anxiety and turmoil, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to find out that Kelly Cochran was off the west coast of the United States. She had cleverly eluded the police and traveled to Kentucky, to the town of Wingo, located more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective contacted the local police, warning that upon discovering Kelly, they should arrest her, exercising extreme caution given her potential danger. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house. Knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts, they acted quickly and without warning. That afternoon, Kelly Cochran was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he resumed interviews with the suspect along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, everything became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Regan was much deeper and more serious than everyone thought. She felt true love for him. Kelly dreamed of leaving this cursed city and starting a new life with him. But everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jason found out about her cheating. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke. But Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14th, 2015, Christopher Regan arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy their encounter while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan. Their evening promised to be special. The lovers had dinner and, according to Kelly, went up to the second floor of the house, but their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso. The perpetrators placed the remains in several trash bags and then disposed of them by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it.
The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects. One of them was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Regan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession. In court, however, she presented a different version. According to her, she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day and caught the lovers off guard. Then he grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Regan. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial, as a plea agreement was reached and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. There she is, serving her sentence, and only regrets that her personal life did not work out. In one phone interview, Kelly stated, "I tried to do what I thought was right. You go to school, you go to college, then you get married," Kelly Cochran shares in an interview. "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work all the time while my husband entertained himself with computer games."
Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes. She claims that she and Jason committed more crimes and Christopher is just one of their many victims. The details, names, and additional crimes Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in hopes that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.